Okay, so in this video, we're going to talk about the math and date functions inside of JavaScript. But before we get into the specifics, we should talk about some basic function terminology. When we talk about a function, what we're talking about is a pre-written piece of code that's designed to complete a task. So this is also known as a method. So you'll hear me use the word function and method interchangeably. You can see um, this box would be our function machine. It would have some kind of name that calls the code. Um, the information coming into the function, the inputs, are also known as parameters in programming. Parameters are the information that's written into the parentheses. If there's more than one parameter, they're separated by commas. And then the outputs are what we call returns inside of programming, and that's the information coming back to the caller from the function. Usually, a function can only return one piece of information, and typically we either output that information in a document.write or window.alert, or we store it in a variable, or we use it in a calculation. So we're going to talk about the JavaScript math class to start out, and there's a number of predefined math functions. We're only going to talk about a handful of them. There's plenty more. You can use this link right up here to get out to more information about the math class. One thing before we start, you'll see it down here. All of the math functions get called starting with a capital M math dot, and capitalization in JavaScript does matter, so please be cautious of that. Okay, so we're starting by talking about functions that deal with powers. We've got two that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about math.sqrt, taking one parameter. That function is the square root function. It takes a number that can be either an integer or a decimal and returns the square root of that number. It's the equivalent of this mathematical function that we're familiar with. So over here on the left, you'll see, or on the right, sorry, you'll see that I've got num1 equals 3 and num2 equals 4. If I window.alert math.sqrt num1, that's taking the square root of 3. So I'm displaying 1.73205 and so on. And if I take math.sqrt num2, the square root of 4 is 2. So inside of the square root variable, that variable is now set equal to the value 2. The second function we'll talk about is math.pow. It takes two parameters. Notice how they're separated by a comma. So it's going to take two numbers. It's going to take a base and it's going to take an exponent. And what we're going to do is we're going to raise the base to the exponent power. So if I write math.pow num1 comma 2, that's 3 to the second power. That's 3 squared, which is 9. So this is going to display 9. And if I do math.pal num2 comma num1, that's 4 to the third power, which stores 64 inside of the variable. Comparisons. JavaScript provides two comparison functions. One's called math.max, the other math.min. Math.max obviously returns the largest of the parameters. Math.min returns the smallest of the parameters. These functions are unique um, among many programming languages in that they take any number of parameters. So you have to have at least two so that there's a comparison, but you could write as many as 10, 20, 30 parameters in there. And JavaScript will go through and find either the largest number or the smallest number. So up here, I'm calling math.max num1, num2. 5.2 is bigger than 1, so we get 5.2. If I call it with all three of them, then it gives me 7. When I go to math.min, if I do num1 and num3, it's going to return the 5.2 because it's the smaller of the two numbers. And in this one, num1, num2, num3, and 0, 0 is the smallest of all of them. So the variable min now stores the value of 0. So again, two or more parameters, all separated by commas. They can be variables or they can be literal numbers. Next in the math class is rounding. We know our basic rounding rules. If you've got 0.5 or bigger, it rounds up to the next integer. If you are less than 0.5, it rounds down. So the rounding functions in JavaScript are rounding from decimals to integers. So if we just call math.round on 5.2, it rounds us down to 5. If I call it on 5.7, it rounds us up to 6. Two other functions often used, math.ceil rounds up, always rounds up. So when I call math.ceil of 5.2, it takes me up to 6. And when I call math.ceil of 5.7, it also takes me up to 6. So no matter what it is, it takes you up to the next highest integer. This is the kind of thing you would use if you were trying to calculate how many cans of paint you might need. If you calculate that you need 8.5 cans of paint, you're not obviously going to go buy 8.5 cans of paint. So what we would do is we would use math.ceil, and that would tell you needed 9 cans of paint. Math.floor does the opposite. It rounds the number down. It truncates the decimal, leaving only the integer value. So whether it's 5.2 or 5.7 going into math.floor, the decimals just get cut off, and we end up with a value of 5. A couple final things inside math class miscellaneous uses. We have math.abs, which takes a number and returns the absolute value, which is always the positive value. So math.abs of negative 3.4 is positive 3.4, and math.abs of 8 is 8. Math.pi is useful. It's a constant, not a function, and it returns us a decimal approximation of pi. We don't have to type in 3.14. We can use math.capital PI, and that gives us a much longer version of the decimal. And then finally, we've got math.random, and we're going to talk a little more about this on the next slide. But math.random returns a random decimal that's between 0 and 1. It can be 0. It will not be 1. So it's from 0 included up to but not including 1. And every time you call random, you're going to get a different decimal. A little more about random. As we said, math.random generates a decimal in the range 0 to 1. Now you'll see this set notation here. The square bracket means that that value is included, and the parenthesis means that this value is not included. So from 0 inclusive up to 1 not inclusive. If I want to widen that range, here's a couple things that I could do. For example, if I took math.random and multiplied by 10, now my range goes from 0 to 10. Decimals from 0 up to but not including 10. Notice I'm not putting anything inside the parentheses of the random function. The random function doesn't take any parameters, but I can take its result and multiply it by 10. If I take that result, the one that went from 0 to 10, and I add 1 to it, now I'm going from 1 to 11. That gives me decimals from 1 up to but not including 11. And then if I force those decimals to be an integer using parseInt, now I'm going from 1 to 11 again, but now it's integers from 1 up to but not including 11, which means we now have the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 inclusive. So I can pick a random number between 1 and 10. So you can kind of play with these things, what you're multiplying by. Sorry, that should be a multiplication sign there. What I'm multiplying by, what I'm adding to get different ranges over here to give us different numbers, different random numbers that we can get. One other thing to talk about is how we display some of these longer decimals that we're going to get. We may want to show a certain number of decimals for scientific reasons. We may want to show 2 decimals if we're talking about monetary money things. So there's a function called toFixed. toFixed takes a number. That number that it takes is the number of decimals that we want to show. So if I calculate 10 divided by 3 and store that in result currently holds the value 3.3333 repeating. When I do result dot to fixed 1, I get 3.3. I only get 1 decimal there. Not the total number of numbers, it's the total number of decimals, numbers to the right of the decimal place. One thing to keep in mind is that if I call to fixed, this number in here is now acting as a string. So I wouldn't want to come out here and do result dot to fixed times 5. It's not going to take kindly to that. I should do all of my mathematical operations prior to calling to fixed. That brings us to the end of the math discussion. Now I want to talk about the JavaScript date class. So JavaScript provides us with some functionality for handling dates and times. Again, we're going to talk about just a couple of them. There are more. Feel free to use this link to get to more information. There's a major difference between the date class and the math class, though, and that is that the math class functions, as you saw, all got called off the word math. The date class functions do not get called off of the word date. We have to first make a date variable, and then we have to call the methods from that variable, and you'll see that in the next slide. So if we talk about dates, there's four functions we're going to talk about. We've got get day, get date, get month, and get full year. Get day is returning the day of the week as a number from 0 to 6. 0 is Sunday, 6 being Saturday. So Monday is 1, Friday is 5, etc., etc. Later on, once you learn something called conditions, we'll be able to take those numbers and turn them into words. But for now, we're just going to get a number 0 to 6 to talk about the day of the week. Get date returns the day of the month from 1 to 31. Get month returns the month as a number from 0 in January to 11 in December. Obviously, if I wanted to show them as their actual values, I could call get month and then add 1 to it, and that would give me 1 to 12. And then finally, get full year returns the year as a 4-digit number. So when you look over here on the right side, you're going to see var today equals new date. This is me making a date type variable and storing it in today. Assuming that today is Wednesday, April 15th, 2020. If I do today.getDay, that's 3. 0 is Sunday, 1 is Monday, 2 is Tuesday, 3 is Wednesday. The date is the 15th. The month is 3 because we normally know that April is 4, but remember January started as 0. So 0 is January, 1 is February, 2 is March, 3 is April. Again, if I took get month plus 1 here, I would see 4. And then get full year returns 2020. Date class also gives us some times. I can do get hours, which is 0 to 23 military time. I can do get minutes, 0 to 59, and get seconds returns 0 to 59. So once again, I still have to write var today equals new date. This variable can be anything that we want, but it has to equal new date. Assuming that it's 8:44 and 53 seconds. When I do get hours, it's 20 because it's 12 plus 8. For military time, when I do get minutes, it's 44, and when I do get seconds, it's 53. All right, so the practice is get the month of today's date and the current minute and store each in a variable. Then add the variables and find the square root of the sum. And then once you've done that, display that output using only 4 decimals. For more information, you can go out to the website, cs.mickeyengel.com, and there are also practice problems there under the JavaScript math page that you should be working on. I'll be back with the next video, which is the solution to this practice problem. Good luck, and I'll talk to you soon.